All right, hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Nick. So glad you're back here with me on the Life Recreator Show, where I always say it's all about learning, healing, and growing. And that's what I'm hoping that you are doing within your own life is learning, healing, and growing. I am so glad to be with you here on this show again. As I've always mentioned, you know what, we're trying to just create a platform, create an opportunity, and content that can help us do those very things, learning, healing, and growing. And so that's what we're going to jump into today. um I know when we think about, and this is kind of what sparked what I'm going to talk about today and kind of what I'm going to dive in today, because we've had a lot of recent crazy things going on in our world, with, just within America. I mean, everywhere you look, everywhere you turn, it seems like there's some, always some type of issue going on, or something that is making headline news. And so we are living in this time where, when we look around and when we see everything that we're experiencing, we're wondering, how did we get to this place that we're in? How did we get to this type of situation in a lot of these recent events that we're seeing? And one of the things that came to my mind, and this it ties a little bit into what we've talked about on this channel before. Obviously, like I said, we're about learning, healing, and growing, and we've talked about and dived into the area of spiritual abuse, what impact that can have, and all these different things. And so this kind of touches into it because it kind of came out of my own experience, out of leaving that situation and the problem that it caused. And one of the things and the problem that I feel like one of the problems that it really caused was this issue with a struggle for validation, and being validated. And this is what I feel like when I thought about this issue of validation. This is what I feel like. I feel we're seeing a lot of issues that are happening in our world and around our world. And this is kind of probably some of the root issue here, where you have people, individuals, things that are happening within inside of them. They're not getting validated, or they're not feeling validated. So it's like, we have to go and do all these extreme things in order to get some recognition and get some validation. And it can be a very dangerous and can be a very deadly thing. So what I want to dive into today is this struggle with validation, and how we can learn how to make a shift, I think. And this can be probably one of the healthier shifts that we can make, is to learn how to not have to depend so heavily on external validation and things that are around us to kind of validate who we are, but rather to kind of take some steps further in our own healing and our own growth, in order to learn how to validate ourselves within. So having it come internally, rather than it being something that we're always looking or seeking for outside of ourselves. So I want to start, what's the definition of validation, right? So the definition of validation is recognition or affirmation that a person or their feelings or opinions are valid or worthwhile. So what does it mean then for us to be validated when we see that definition? If the definition tells us that it means that somebody is recognized or they're affirmed um, for their feelings or their opinions, and that they are seen as valid, what I think when I hear what does it mean to be validated, what I a lot of times think about is how, when we're in that space where we want to be validated, it's often coming from a place where we just want to be either seen, we want to be heard, we want to be understood by those that maybe are around us, right? Seen, heard, and understood is something that, if you look at, some of the things that we all need to survive and that we all are built and wired for, those are the core issues that a lot of us, we face as human beings, right? We all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, we all want to be understood. In other words, we all have this deep desire for us to be validated in some type of way. And so for me, what I kind of thought about when I thought about that is, okay, so what happens to us when we find ourselves in this place where we're no longer getting this validation that we kind of crave, right? Or where we're no longer experiencing or feeling that what the environment that we're in, the people that are around us aren't really there to help us be seen, heard, and understood, right? And so I started thinking back on my own life and looking at where I began picking up what I would guess I would call them basically patterns of validation. So in other words, like what were the circumstances and what were the things that I encountered and the things that I went through that kind of caused me to develop this thing or this need to get this external validation from somewhere else. And I'm not saying that it's bad. All I'm just saying is, as I kind of explain all of this, you'll see where it became a challenge because I was constantly looking for it outside. So if I look at my own patterns of validation, I grew up in a conservative Caribbean family. We were always either doing something in church. I didn't see any kind of drinking, didn't see any smoking, didn't see any partying. I didn't see anything that was outside of what you would probably see within, like a church family. And then on top of that, like I said, it was a Caribbean family. So there was a lot of things that we did differently. But what that environment showed me was it showed me how to behave and how to be in good standing with my parents. So it kind of basically trained me on what I needed to do or and what behavior was accepted, um even if a lot of times maybe those things that like I was kind of brought up to do weren't necessarily things that I may have agreed with. I would still kind of fall into line because I somehow wanted externally someone to basically just kind of give me the rules, let me know, hey, what do I have to do to be seen, what do I have to do to be heard, what do I have to do to be understood. And I learned earlier on out of the environment and the family environment that I grew up is as long as I, stay within this behavior and stay within these good standings, then I can find that validation. And so for me, it made a lot of sense. It was easy. It was very logical for me to understand, okay, hey, I do this, boom, this is a response. I do that, boom, this is the response. And so at a very young age, I believe I kind of started learning how to just kind of fall in line with those expectations just so that it could validate me as an individual, right? Kind of fast forward after that experience of growing up in my family, I joined the military. The military, if you think about it, it's one of those environments that a lot of times we are really applauded for our behavior. How, we talk about things like our military bearing, right? So basically our ability to be able to act and be able to hold ourselves in a certain pattern of behavior for a long extended period of time that, in our minds as military, we're like, an average person, it would be hard for them to understand this and just kind of develop that behavior. But the thing with the military that is so interesting is you think about it, everything is like rank in the military. And so when you're making rank, when you're doing good, when you are basically, following that behavior, following the pattern, the kind of outline, the direction that they kind of want you to kind of behave and how you want to live, what you see in the military is that the better I become at falling in line with a lot of those things, right, the more validated I get. And then it's a tangible kind of validation, meaning that as I get better at certain behaviors and responding a certain way in this environment, my rank can go up, right? I can get promoted to different ranks. I can get promoted to different levels and different jobs and all these different things. So the better I am at following orders, the better I am at my military bearing, the better I am at, sticking to a certain behavior and a certain guideline, the more likely it was for me to be able to make rank. And it was a tangible thing. And for a man, I feel like, and this is just me speaking from a man's point of view, but I think it could be for anybody. But in all reality, when I would see that and I would experience that, that was an external validation because somebody was telling me, hey, as long as you do X, Y, and Z, as long as you behave in a certain way, in a way that the military says is acceptable, or in an excelled way, you're going to make rank, you're going to be rewarded for it, you're going to be validated for it, right? So that was my second experience. Then moving on into the church experience that we had. On my channel, I talk a lot about spiritual abuse, what that looks like, what that experience is like, because I feel like personally, one of my things is being a pastor, being somebody that was in that leadership position and in that leadership arena, seeing some of the things that would happen to us, seeing the behavior that we were really kind of forced to behave in a certain way. In that experience, I can see how, and in a lot of those other videos, like I was saying, I really just talk about, and I kind of just dive into what spiritual abuse is. But back to what I was saying is that, where we experience that spiritual abuse at, everything there were a lot of times either performance based or they were fear based, right? And so oftentimes everything was dictated by either how much you pray, how much are you giving, how often are we seeing you at meetings, how involved are you coming to outreach, how many people are you bringing to the church. So a lot of these different things that we kind of dealt with in the church revolved around, as long as I fall within a certain behavior and act a certain way based on what you're telling me I need to do, and how I need to excel, I'll get that validation I need. And in my case, it ended up working. As long as I follow the line with that behavior, as long as I, did what I was, told was, the righteous way or the holy way to live. As long as I did those things according to that environment standards, I was getting that external validation that I really needed. And it helped me to basically, just like the military, kind of go up in the same type of ranks. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that what it is when you see these different patterns, right? What we're talking about with those patterns of validation, you see that a lot of times we end up, or we can find ourselves in different environments where we rely on like that external feedback so much to dictate like who we are, how we should behave, and how we should, respond to certain things, because we're always looking for that validation. The problem I experienced even in the church, and I see this in a lot of times and a lot of situations, is think about in a performance-based system, you're constantly associating what you do with who you are. So there's always this connection of performance, right? I feel like sometimes men can have this struggle a lot of times, this performance anxiety of always having to connect what you do as a person with who you are. And so when you're not able to do a certain thing, or you're not able to respond a certain way or behave a certain way, what can end up happening is that affects and it impacts how you feel about who you are as a person. You start feeling like, okay, maybe I'm missing something here, or I can't get it together. If you think about being in a fear-based system, you're constantly associating what other people think of you, and you're confusing that with who you are. So if we're always in a fear-based system, I'm always looking at how this person's body language is, what words that they're using, how they respond, or how they say good morning, how they say this or how they say that. And I'm taking that feedback, I'm taking those cues from this fear-based system, and then I'm internalizing that and saying that this is confusing me, and thinking that, because they responded in a bad way, maybe I'm doing something wrong, maybe I'm dealing with something, or I have to handle something in myself. And so you're constantly now confusing really who you are with the response of everyone else in your environment. So you're constantly reacting to these things. And what I feel like is a lot of times that stuff is like a heat-seeking missile, right? My looking for validation externally is it'll always be on. We're always looking for ways for other people to tell us that we're doing okay. We're always looking for ways for other people to tell us who we are and what we can do and all these different things. And I experience this oftentimes. And I think when you think about what we're seeing a lot of today with these young men within our country, committing these acts of violence, doing all these different things, you see a photo of them when they're on the screen and you're like, man, it just looks like that kid, and I'm not saying that this is the answer to it, but all I'm saying is like you can see somewhere in there that this kid wanted somebody to pay attention to them, reach out to them, help them. I know there's a lot of dynamics in there. Like I said, this is not the answer to that question, but it's a piece of the puzzle. I think that a lot of these kids they're seeking some type of validation from someone in their environment that they need it from, And what they find what ends up happening is, in their minds, they think, okay, well, let me commit this crime, or do this horrendous act, and then people will actually pay attention to me. Now people will know who I am. Now it'll be national, right? Now everybody will know who I am. And now we all know that it's not the way to go. That's not the route that we need to be going in order to get validation. But if you're lacking it, and then you can't find it in yourself, these are some of the steps that we may take, if we let it go that far, and let it damage us that far, when we're constantly seeking it. So when we think about everything and we kind of wind down to this issue of validation, what I really feel like the goal it's for us to be able to get to a point that I'm okay, and really okay, with just being okay with who I am, right? Being okay with who I am. So learning how to find my own self validation internally, learning how to be able to look internally and say, you know what? I can find out who I am as a man, who I am as a woman, who I am with however I identify. I can internally get that validation that I need. And I don't necessarily have to constantly look externally for something to tell me that I'm doing a good job or that I'm okay. The reason this was such an issue for me is when I left the church, going back to those patterns of validation, when I left the church, I was in a space for about 5-6 years where I didn't have anybody really externally giving me this feedback on how I'm supposed to act as a man, how I'm supposed to act as a husband, how I'm supposed to, work, how I'm supposed to do all these different things. I didn't have anybody in that space for probably one of the first times in my life telling me how I'm supposed to behave and how I'm supposed to act as a man. And so here I am in this space, and I'm saying, okay, I don't have anybody really giving me any of this guidance that I'm so accustomed and used to hearing, and used to responding off of the validation that it gave me because I was able to follow those directions better. I'm in a space where now I have to develop who I want to become, because I don't have somebody constantly around me trying to tell me who I need to be. And so this was a really scary place for me. I'll be honest, as an adult, as somebody kind of going into their 40s, and going into that, that time of life, I was in a scary space, because I was like, man, where am I supposed to get this validation from now? Where am I supposed to get this feedback from now? I don't have anybody in my environment at that time that's telling me this is how I need to be and this is how I need to behave. And it was a very scary place for me to be. But this is where I believe it had to lead me to finding out how to discover how to validate myself, how to be able to feel okay with myself, learning how to be able to look within and say, you know what? God's got it. He has all this under control, right? I can look to him. I can look to his word. I can look to something within me, right? That can help me to not have to rely on all this different feedback outside of me to give me comfort as who I am, as a man. And so, I feel like this is where that challenge came from within me to find my own self validation. And there's two ways that I really kind of started thinking about this and approaching it. Number one was just simple awareness, right? So I had to stop, and I had to sit down and think, okay, where are the areas and what are the things that I had in my life? Not only just on a broader scale, but just even on a micro level, not just, like a big macro level, but what are the things that I had in my life and that I was constantly seeking validation from? What are the things that I had that were around me that I was constantly, um, you know, seeing or saying that those things defined who I was as an individual. When I was preaching, I think when I was in ministry, it was the pulpit, right? It was being there and hearing the head nods and I mean not hearing the head nods, but seeing the head nods and hearing the amens and that feedback, that constant, like, hey, yeah, you're doing a good job. Hey, we agree with what you're saying. We hear you. We understand you. We see you. And so then that's that constant feedback that I was getting. So I had to stop and start looking, okay, well, what am I constantly trying to look to get this constant validation within myself? And I had to start identifying those things. And then once I began to start identifying those things, it led me to the second thing, right? Which is identifying it. So the first thing was being aware of it. The second thing is actually identifying what those things were. What were those external things giving me, and how can I now learn how to give those things to myself? Right? How can I now learn how to say, all right, I understand that I was in this certain environment, and kind of even going back to ministry, understanding that, I got validation out of hearing these certain things and recognizing within myself, okay, well, what was it that caused me to need that? And then how could I learn how to give that type of validation to myself? Right? It might be writing, it might be, helping somebody one-on-one. It might be, recording a video or recording a thought or something like that. It might be all these different kind of ways that I can say, you know what, I can find within myself to do something that I'm not having to require, this external force, this external influence to validate me, right? And so those are the two things, man. Just really awareness, just seeing where they were coming from. And then number two, identifying what those external things were and seeing how I could learn how to give those things to myself. One of the big things that I'm learning, and I've learned through this healing process, is how much God has really equipped us to learn how to really deal with and handle a lot of these traumas and hurts that most of us have faced. A lot of times we're struggling, we get hurt, we experience these things, and then we get into these patterns where we're always looking externally to validate us. I mean, one of the prime examples that I see happening, even in our lives, and I know I've been affected by it and impacted by it, is just social media, right? Social media gives you that constant external validation, that constant, hey, you're doing good, that constant like, that constant heart, whatever the case may be. And that can be very addictive, because it can be like, okay, this is where I know I'm going to be heard. I know I'm going to be seen. I know I'm going to be understood, which is fine. But there comes times where, hey, that validation might not be what I need at that time. There might be spaces that we find ourselves in that, I got to dig deep and find out within myself how to validate who I am as an individual, how to feel okay with who I am as an individual, and really just learning how to really work through that. And so I think this is the key thing that some of us struggle with. Like I said, I struggle with it myself, finding that validation. But I want to know from you, if you've stuck around this far, drop a comment down below. Let me know, like, what are the things, maybe the struggles that you faced, things that you've looked to outside of yourself to try and find that validation, and what maybe are some steps that you've kind of taken to kind of find more of an internal validation, that internal peace, that many of us are looking for. And so I want to hear that below. Listen, also too, I'm super excited. I got some stuff coming up on the way, man, that I'm really excited about. I'm working on some things that I feel like can help men's and their mental health. And so about to be dropping some things here in a little bit. Been, quiet and kind of under the radar, and just, really wanting to work on some things to try and help in a lot of that area of mental health, obviously spiritual abuse, things that happen in the church, the damage that can, just kind of be fixed and helped along with when that stuff happens. So definitely stay tuned to that. It's going to be something that I'm really excited about. I really hope that it can make an impact and really just help some people out there. So, this has been Nick, Life Recreated channel. Do me a favor, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Hit us up. If you had any questions or anything like that, definitely drop that down in the comment below. But until next time, keep learning, keep healing, and just keep growing.